talk to any Labour aide and they will tell you about this small target strategy. It's all about keeping the target small. They're not going to be announcing all these policies that potentially the government could steal from them, or that the government could attack them on.
OK, Alain and Sienna. Let's start with something new, actually, and this concerns the date of the election. The Chancellor, of course, yesterday announced that the spring budget would be on March the 6th. Emily Thornberry has said it's the worst kept secret in Westminster that a May election is incoming. Sienna, do you agree?
No, I do not agree. I think what's happening there is it's not the worst kept secret in Westminster. I think it's true that Labour has been preparing for a May election in terms of its candidates. It's going to do a massive batch of centrally selected candidates next month. So it's doing things like that, but I wouldn't read too much into the budget date, which is what Emily Thornberry was kind of saying. I think that Rishi Sunak is trying to keep his options open because his authority over his party can be a bit shaky at times, as we saw with that Rwanda bill before Christmas. But basically, Labour want the narrative to be that a May election is kind of a foregone conclusion, because then it will be more embarrassing for Sunak to be seen as sort of chickening out by going late if he does that. And I do still think, despite bringing forward some, the kind of the national insurance stuff to January, but despite having an early budget date, I still think it's more likely to have an autumn election, just because it would be so brave, possibly foolish, for a prime minister 20 points behind to be calling an election. That would be an extraordinary thing to do. So I still think that an autumn election is more likely. And I think that Labour is trying to shape the narrative here by saying that.
Yeah, I wonder if Thornberry's goading a little bit. I mean, Alain, for you, one reason that it could be May is that there are local government elections. And if the Conservatives perform badly in those, they're really going to sort of limp along, aren't they, to the autumn campaign if they're to hold the elections then. What is your impression?
Yeah, I think it's always kind of made a lot of political sense to have it in May, to go alongside the May elections. It means that you run one big campaign. You can it's much easier to get out all your volunteers if they're going for all elections in one. But the people inside Number 10, Liam Booth-Smith and Isaac Levida, who ran the last election campaign for the Conservatives, have always been dead against it. They've always wanted to go for October. And I think we're perhaps reading a bit too much into as Sienna says, doing these earlier interventions on the economic side of things, because actually what the government wants is to get those done early. That national insurance comes in next month. The budget will be in March, so that means that the anything that's announced in here, might be inheritance tax, etc., can happen sort of straight away, and then the government can then give themselves perhaps 6 months until the autumn for those changes to make an effect, so they can say, look, this is what we're able to do for you, and then go later. I think it's really interesting. Sienna, talking about like the kind of shaping that narrative. Famously, back in the 2000s, when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister and didn't go for an early election, the Tories hounded him for it, and they called him Bottle of Brown, and they handed out these bottles of brown ale called Bottle of Brown Ale to lobby journalists, and it really was this millstone around Gordon Brown's neck by not going early, by being frit, by going as late as possible. And I think Labour would love to sort of get a bit of their own back on Rishi Sunak by making it seem as if he's turned his back on an early election and instead is stretching out for as long as possible.
Scaredy cat Sunak, huh?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, I've basically had Labour people confirm that is what they're doing.
Spot on then.
For a May election, they've been quite honest about it, that this is what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Interesting. Scaredy cat Sunak. I don't know if it give out cats, but it doesn't work quite as well as the bottle of brown ale, does it? But I'm sure they'll come up with something. One big question, I think, with Labour, both of you, is what they stand for. Are we clear enough with what Labour stand for? Is the strength of considering them in government rather than in opposition just that they're not the Conservatives? Do they just not have to mess up? That is their main objective. When we talk about what Labour stand for, Keir Starmer told us, didn't he, with his five pledges. We had Rishi Sunak's, they've dominated the year, but Keir Starmer made his own. Before we hear what they are, I wonder how much of an impression they've made. Can you name two of them each? This is so mean of me.
There's definitely one about making Great Britain energy. There's definitely one, and there's one about keeping the streets safe. I remember
Safer
that's my.
streets, yeah. Safer streets is one. Clean energy is another.
Yeah, there we go.
Sienna, for you?
Oh
Am I
God.
dropping you in there,
Alan's
Sienna? I'm
probably
really sorry.
cleared up.
You've completely shown me up, Alain. It's
No,
Christmas. We're all still a bit hungover.
There was
Shall I
one,
give you a bit
definitely
of
one about
help?
building. Was there one about building, about
Building,
getting more houses built?
housing.
No, we have heard about building houses from Labour, actually. That is one thing that they've been more vocal about. But the others are highest G7 growth, future of the NHS, and opportunity for all. Note that these are brilliantly vague compared to Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, which were real nails in the mast. I have to say, stop the boats, halve inflation. That one was successful. Cut NHS waiting lists. Clean energy, highest G7 growth, future of the NHS, opportunity for all. I mean, that's so vague. And safer streets. Those are the pledges. This is then Keir Starmer talking about taking power.
There was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, when questions such as, is Britain destined for decline, would have felt ridiculous even to ask. And I have to warn you, our way back from this will be hard. But know this, what is broken can be repaired. What is ruined can be rebuilt. Wounds do heal. And ultimately, that project, their project, will crash against the spirit of working people in this country, and they are the source of my hope.
Yeah, I mean, stirring words there from Keir Starmer to the Labour Party conference. I wonder how convinced we are about their plan of attack, though, aside from the election timing, Sienna. Where are Labour strongest? What do they need to be more definitive about saying that they're going to do for the electorate?
I mean, I think that, they just have to be more definitive, don't they? As you say, that the missions are incredibly general. There's no specifics in there, really. They have made some pledges. One in particular, the sort of 28 billion green investment one, is constantly they're getting their knickers in a twist about that and going back and forth, it seems. The Labour poll lead is significant but soft. Many voters are undecided as well.
A fifth of voters.
Yeah, exactly. A fifth voters. And I mean, on the other hand, only 6% think the Tories have done a good job in government, right? So, but at the moment, it is a rejection of the incumbents rather than a kind of big wave of enthusiasm for Labour. It doesn't feel like that sort of excitement like maybe 97. But everything could change during the short campaign. I mean, at the moment, talk to any Labour aide and they will tell you about this small target strategy. It's all about keeping the target small. They're not going to be announcing all these policies that potentially the government could steal from them or that the government could attack them on. And they just want that target to be as small as possible until they get to the short campaign. And Labour's really relying on voters to then switch on suddenly at that point, start listening to politics, tune in. And that's when they tell us, that's when their offer to the country will really be fleshed out. I think there is some kind of disagreement as to whether that will be based on the 5 missions. Different Labour people are kind of saying different things about that, whether that's their jumping off point or it will evolve. But certainly they will be getting into the specifics, but really quite late on.
Okay.
Yeah. I think what's interesting on that is that they it's kind of a bit of a chess strategy. It's quite defensive. Whenever the Tories kind of push forward, Labour, rather than matching them, try and sort of hold back, because there's a lot of the Tories want to create wedge issues and drive wedges between Labour and the electorate, and I think Labour don't really want to play that game, certainly not now this far out from an election. And I think often people say that the Labour haven't announced enough, we don't know enough what Labour sort of stands for. I actually kind of reject that a little bit, because I think if you look back over the last 18 months, Labour have announced quite a lot of policies. They have announced quite a lot of, they've diagnosed a lot of the issues they want to.
Go on then, Alain. Tell us 3 specific policies which you are pleased with.
No, it's not more. It's more that people they haven't really announced them very loudly. They've announced them quite quietly, and I think the problem with it, with the electorate haven't really had their ears open to listen to it. And I think actually people talking about, oh, are Labour going to spend this year announcing lots of policy? I don't think they will. I think they'll spend this year probably re-announcing a lot of the things that they've already kind of come up with, and a bit louder to try and get people together, because it's not as though they haven't been working on these policies and they haven't been trying them out. It's just and testing them out. It's just they haven't really been shouting about them, because as Sienna says, they're building that kind of small target. The 28 billion was the one sort of big splashy policy, and they sort of U-turned on it, and they're now appearing sort of U-turn on it again. We're hearing the last couple of days, so they know how difficult it's going to be, and they're going to sort of save those up until we get towards the short campaign, and then they really kind of perhaps unleash that. And I suppose that shape of it we still don't know, but I suppose that's kind of the point for them, is that they're not offering too much of that, especially if we perhaps have another 8, 10, maybe even 12 months until voters actually go to the polls.
Yeah, they have been trying things on for size. The front page of the Times today, Labour will promise big expansion of childcare. This is childcare places so nurseries in primary schools, essentially. And we've heard a lot about childcare from Labour, so that is something I think that we'll get from them again. They fully realise that there's an opportunity there, particularly, with those middle income, middle class earners.